Okay. I think I'm at the end of the road here as far as I can go into realistic mythology. Um, if you're following my work, you know that I've uncovered the story of an ancient family that I call the Cronides that traveled the world to teach everybody within it the art of agriculture and other things such as medicine. And I put my research, or my research puts their time period between 15,000 and 19,000 years ago. And I came to that conclusion from two sources. One of them would be Manetho, and the other would be Diodorus Siculus. Manetho gives a very extensive timeline of all of the pharaohs of Egypt back to the mythical kings and then to the gods. And it, per my estimates, I guessed about 15,000 to 19,000 after years ago after reading it. Now, Diodorus Siculus says that they existed anywhere between 10,000 and 23,000 years from the time of Alexander the Great, which would be about 12,000 to 25,000 years ago. So that fits in with my timeline. I've also shown you that Osiris is Dionysus, the son of Zeus, and I proved that out in many of the writings that I have presented to you in my research. I've also proven out that Odin is Zeus. I've proven out that the Celtic Dogda is Zeus. I've proven out because Dionysus is Osiris, Jeb would be Zeus. I've proven out that many of these gods and goddesses across the globe are the same people. They did the same thing. I've showed you in the writings of Diodorus Siculus and Nonus and Plutarch and many others that they did, it says that they did travel the world to not only wipe out the cannibalistic giants, but to teach the humans agriculture and other things that they needed. Now, many of the descendants of Zeus became your rulers, your kings and your queens and your pharaohs. And I went through many books and other sources to determine this diagram of where all the bloodlines came from. But there's a problem here, and it's with the timeline. And as I dig, further and further into this mythology and credible anthropology, there's a problem. And the problem is the initial time period with many sources for these Cronides is about 15,000 to 19,000 years ago, could even be 25,000 years ago, or even more, 32,000. So they spawn many of these bloodlines. But when you begin to go into some of the current bloodlines of 2,000 to 3,000 years ago out of Italy and the Nordic countries, Sweden and Norway, and into England and Egypt and into the Middle East, they all claim to be spawned by these gods and goddesses of the Cronides. But the period is only 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. Now, the case in point would be Aeneas from Troy. He was a Trojan prince, and he was the son of Anchises, a Trojan prince, and Aphrodite. And his father was seduced by Aphrodite, and he was told not to tell anybody, and she was going to have a son by him and have the nymphs raise the son until he was 5 years old, and then return the 5-year-old to Anchises, and that's what she did. But Anchises bragged about his relationship, and he was struck in the leg with a thunderbolt by Zeus to punish him and to tell him to shut his mouth. Now, when the Trojans went into the war and they lost, Aeneas and several followers and his father, whom he carried, escaped Troy, and they went off to start anew. And they ended up in Carthage, and Aeneas fell in love with Dido and vice versa, and he was going to stay with her, but the gods told him, no, you're not allowed to. You have to go into Italy. That is where your destiny is going to be, and you will leave Dido. And he obeyed the gods. Now, when he did that, Dido was completely heartbroken, and she cursed the Romans who came from Aeneas, and she committed suicide. And that is some of the impetus for some of the wars between Carthage and the Romans, the Punic Wars. But continuing on with Aeneas, he went into Italy, and he ended up marrying an Italian princess, Lavinia, who was promised to someone else, but he defeated that person in war, and he married her. And then his grandson, Brutus, ended up killing his father, and then he was exiled, and he went in eventually up into England. And there's a Brutus stone in England, and that is where he landed, and he is credited as the first king of Britain. And the King Arthur, the King Arthur came from his bloodline. Now, if you look at Wikipedia, they are citing this legendary Brutus as existing around anywhere between 1112 or 1081 BC or the 12th century, which puts you back at about 31 to 3200 years ago. Now, how could Brutus, being the grandson of Aeneas, who was the son of Aphrodite, been born thousands of years between the time of the Cronides and the time that it's said that he existed? We have a major problem. If at the minimum the Cronides existed 12,000 years ago, that's a 9,000-year difference from when the grandson of Aeneas, which would be the great-grandson of Aphrodite, was born. Something's very wrong. Now, continuing on, that was talking about Brutus. There's also the Nordic kings, and that is another curious case. And in the Heimskringla, it gives a quite extensive history. And this bloodline was spawned by Frey, who was the son of Odin, and he would be the equivalent of Apollo. And if you look at what they have here now for these Nordic kings, it's called the Yngling line. Apollo Frey spawned the Yngling line. And this first son, hopefully I pronounced right, Jolnir, is said to, was, as I said, was the son of Apollo Frey. He was a contemporary of the Caesar. And that would put him, Caesar Augustus, around 63 BC to 14 AD, slightly over 2,000 years ago. So here you have a son of Odin, Zeus, spawning the Yngling dynasty only about 2,000 years ago. So over 10,000-year difference between when these Cronides walked the planet. Now you have the pharaohs as well, and Manetho, like I said, gives an extensive history of it. And if you look quickly at Wikipedia, I mean, just even the minimum of when they had Narmer and some of these other pharaohs from Dynasty 0, it goes back to 3150 BC, which is about 5,150 years ago, or 5,200 years ago. And there were several in-between kings between this pharaoh and Dionysus Osiris. So at the minimum, there's a history of over 6,000 years to when this Pharaonic bloodline was spawned by the same people who were family members or bloodline related to the Cronides. So we have major issues with all of these timelines, and even the Persian king, the kings of Persia. That's another one. The Achaemenid Empire, which is where Cyrus the Great came from, and Darius, and they have this stone that they call the Behestin stone that gives the history of Darius the Great and his relationship back to the Zeus, or they had a different name for Zeus at the time, but he's shown with this god in a flying ship above him, and his 23 satrapies or governors that were subject to him. But this line also said possibly to go back to Perseus, which would have been a son of Zeus. And the problem here with this is another bloodline that really doesn't go back that far. We're talking maybe 550 BC or 25 to 2600 years ago. And just like the Trojan War, that didn't go back very far either. That's 3 to 3,500 years ago. So we have a major problem with these timelines that are being given for all of these dynasties. Okay, so something very, very strange is going on here when we have royal house bloodlines being spawned by the same gods and goddesses that existed thousands of years before houses were spawned, and then another 1,000 years spawning another one. And then I could even get into the story of Alexander the Great being spawned by Zeus only 2,300 years ago, and your story of Jesus as well. Now, what do we have going on here? Is there a big mistake in the time period? The story is the same. I will stand by that. These Cronides were who they were. Their relationships are described over and over in many different sources, and I would stand by it was over 10,000, 12,000, 15,000 years ago, somewhere around there. As far as these new houses, this Engling bloodline and the Persian bloodline and the Caesars who came from Aeneas and the British kings who came from Brutus, who was the grandson of Aeneas, those being only 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, I don't know. So what are some of the possible scenarios of what we got going on here? Well, there could be a mistake in the timing. Well, I doubt it. It's pretty clear, and there is physical evidence for these pharaohs existing 6,000 years ago, which would be a 3,000-year difference between Aeneas. So could people like Aeneas and the Persian king and the Nordic kings be saying that they came from these gods and goddesses who existed 10,000 years before their time? I don't know. That's a possibility. The second possibility could be we have something very, very deceptive going on here on this planet. And I want to reread something from these esoteric books. Now, the Nag Hammadi Library, I've already shown you in a previous video that the Archons are the Cronides, and that the head demiurge was thrown into Tartarus. Now, in the Apocryphon of John, it says that this demiurge wanted to mate with the human women, but they didn't want to, so they had to change their image. Now, let me read this. And he made a plan with his powers. He sent his angels to the daughters of men, that they might take some of them for themselves and raise offspring for their enjoyment. And at first they did not succeed. When they had no success, they gathered together again, and they made a plan together. They created a counterfeit spirit, who resembles the spirit who had descended, so as to pollute the souls through it. And the angels changed themselves in their likeness into the likeness of their parentheses, the daughters of men and parentheses, mates, filling them with the spirit of darkness, which they had mixed for them, and with evil. They brought gold and silver and a gift, and copper and iron and metal and all kinds of things. And they steered the people who had followed them into great troubles by leading them astray with many deceptions. They, the people, became old without having enjoyment. They died, not having found truth, and without knowing the God of truth, and thus the whole creation became enslaved forever, from the foundation of the world until now. And they took women and begot children out of the darkness, according to the likeness of their spirit. And they closed their hearts, and they hardened themselves through the hardness of the counterfeit spirit until now. Okay, stopping. This whole Nag Hammadi library states that these archons created humans, and that they are androgynous. They try to mate with these humans, and the humans don't like them. So this passage has told you that they had to put on a deception and change their appearance to look like humans, and in particular, human women, or probably less bearded, less masculine, but more male. So here is the first clue from an esoteric book. The second clue would come from this Dead Sea Scrolls. And the Dead Sea Scrolls has several strange passages in it. And there are variations in the translations. Now, there's this character called Amram. He's supposed to be the father of Moses, and he has a vision or a dream. And it goes like this. This is from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's basically called The Vision of Amram. And it says, in my vision, the vision of the dream, and there were two figures arguing over me and saying, blank, and holding a great dispute over me. So I asked them, how is it that you have authority over me? They said, we rule and have authority over all the human race. And they said to me, which one of us, blank? I lifted my eyes and saw one of them, whose appearance was dreadfully frightening. His clothing was blank, multicolored, and very dark. And I saw another, and he was pleasant in his appearance, and his face was laughing, and he was covered in white. Okay, I'm going to stop. In other translations, the frightening one has a face like a viper, and that is a different translation. And what is also interesting here in this Dead Sea Scrolls is the Book of Giants, and it talks about that the angels using animals to procreate with and making just all kind of miscegenation. And it part of the fragments are gone, but it just says 200 donkeys, 200 asses, 200 rams of the flock, 200 goats, 200 beasts of the field, from every animal, from every bird, for miscegenation. Okay, so they were making hybrids from the animals. That was one of the problems. Now, the other thing in this Dead Sea Scrolls from the Book of Giants is this, one of these giants, who his name is Maweh, the Titan son of the angel Barakel. And I'm pretty sure, if I recall right, Barakel was one of your fallen watchers. He has a dream, and he reports this to his fellow giants. And he sees a tablet being immersed in the water, and when it emerges, all but 3 names have been washed away. And the dream symbolizes the destruction of all but Noah and his sons of the flood. And he talks to this other giant, Oya, about this dream. And let's see. Yeah. And another giant has, Oya has also another vision. Let me read some of this. Let's see. Blank, they drenched the tablet in the water. The waters went up over the tablet. They lifted out the tablet from the water. The giant goes to the others, and they discuss the dream. This vision is for cursing and sorrow. I am the one who confessed. The whole group of castaways that I shall go to blank, the spirits of the slain, complaining about their killers and crying out that we shall die together and be made an end of blank much. And I will be sleeping and bread, and for my dwelling the vision, and also entered into the gathering of the giants. Oya, and he said to Mawe without trembling, who showed you all of this vision, my brother? Barakel, my father, was with me. Before Mawe had finished telling what he had seen, and said to him, now I have heard wonders, if a barren woman gives birth. Then thereupon Oya and Tahaya, okay, there's some of these fragments are missing, to be destroyed from upon the earth. The earth, when they wept before the giants. Thereupon Oya said to Haya, then he answered, it is not for us, but for Azazel, for he did the blank. The children of angels are the giants, and they would not let all their loved ones be neglected. We have not been cast down, you have strength. And then it says the giants realize the fertility of fighting against the forces of heaven. And then they speak to Gilgamesh. And then Gilgamesh, as I've told you, is Heracles. It says, I am a giant, and by the majority strength of my arm and my own strength, anyone mortal, and I have made war against them. But I am not blank, able to stand against them. For my opponents reside in heaven, and they dwell in the holy places. And not that they are stronger than I. Of the wild beast has come, and the wild man they call me. Then Oyo said to him, I have been forced to have a dream. The sleep of my eyes vanished to let me see a vision. Now I know that I'm blank Gilgamesh. Okay, it says Oya's dream vision is of a tree. Okay, so now Oya is having a dream vision of a tree that is uprooted except for 3 of its roots. The vision's import is the same as that of the first dream. And it goes on, 3 of its roots, while I was watching, they moved the roots into this garden, all of them in knot. Oya tries to avoid the implications of the visions. Above he said that it referred only to the demon Azazel. Here he suggests that the destruction is for the earthly rulers alone. Concerns the death of our souls and of all our comrades. And Oya told them what Gilgamesh said to him. And it was said concerning blank, the leader has cursed the potentates. And the giants were glad at his words. Then he turned and left. And then it goes on that they want to contact Enoch. And it just says to Enoch, the noted scribe, and he will interpret for us the dream. Thereupon his fellow Oya declared and said to the giants, I too had a dream this night, O giants, and behold, the ruler of heaven came down to earth, and such is the end of the dream. Thereupon all the giants and monsters grew afraid and called Mawe. He came to them, and the giants pleased with him and sent him to Enoch, the noted scribe. They said to him, go to you that you have heard this voice. And he said to him, he will interpret the dreams, how long the giants have to live. Okay, I'm going to stop. So here I've told you a couple things. I've told you some of the names of the giants and who their fathers were, which watchers. And I've told you that they were trying to procreate with animals. And I've also told you that they were killing humans who cursed them from their souls because these giants were killing them. Now, if we're going to go to the book of Enoch out of the Pseudepigrapha, we get the third clue from these esoteric writings as to what this group of angels and this God is. And from the book of Enoch, the Ethiopian book, when they talk about Enoch going on this journey with the angels, it says, And they lifted me up into one place where there were the ones like the flaming fire. And when they so desire, they appear like men. And they took me into a place of whirlwind in the mountain. The top of its summit was reaching into heaven. Okay, I'm going to stop. So he's telling you they can appear like men when they want to. And there is one other passage, and these angels are white. They're snow white. Let me find this passage here for you. That here we go. Vision of the four heavenly beings from the book of Enoch. Again, I saw them commencing to gore and devour one another, so the earth began to cry aloud. And I lifted my eyes unto heaven and saw a vision. And behold, there came forth from heaven a being in the form of a snow white person. One came out of that place, and three others with him. Those ones which had come out last seized me by my hand, and took me from the generations of the earth, lifted me up into a high place, and showed me a high tower above the earth, and all the hills were firm. One of them said to me, stay here until you see everything that will happen to these elephants, camels, and donkeys, as well as to the stars and to the bovides, all of them. Okay, I've talked about this book of Enoch and what these Nephilim, which are the offspring of human women, and these angels were supposed to be watchers, what they were doing to the average human, and they were killing and eating and torturing them. And they were condemned, and that is why the earth was flooded. And you can equate that to Atlantis being destroyed because the inhabitants were these giants and they were evil, or whatever. But what I've just shown you is that I will, as I said, I'll stand behind the mythology and what's written, and it's a consistent story of these Cronides, and combat. The common theme is they want to mate with humans to make children for their enjoyment. But the problem is that the offspring of these angels and the human women become huge, and they're just devilish, and they abuse and eat the average human. Not all of them do, but a lot of them did, and therefore they had to be destroyed. But the men of renown, come from this Zeus line. Zeus is your Jehovah. And I've shown you that these watchers, out of some of them, one of them is actually the equivalent of the Greek brother of Cronus, and that would be Iapetus, and he was a teacher of astrology. So I've shown you over and over that all of this mythology and esoteric texts are talking about the same beings, and these beings are described as snow white and just horrible to look upon and frightening, and they have to change their appearance and appear as human. So what have we got going on here? And the fact that there are royal bloodlines spawned by the same Cronides, but the spawning is thousands of years apart. And I've also told you in my other videos about some of the Africans and the Dogon, talking about the ugly Nomos, and that they came and taught them things and created a Hogan priest. And the Mamiwata story from West Africa of a shapeshifter who wants to mate with the people there, but she shapeshifts. So we have a very, very interesting scenario that we are a creation that was created for working for these beings, mining metals, digging canals, to provide them children for their amusement and entertainment and enjoyment. And some of these beings didn't treat humans very well, and their offspring would eat humans and slave them and treat them pretty awful. Now, I've told you in the Americas that cannibalism and sacrifice was all over the place. It was a cannibal sacrifice culture until Cortez and Pizarro came over and wiped it out, as well as the Catholic Church. I'm not going to say everybody in the Americas was doing that, but I've already shown you that the anthropologist Dr. Christy Turner proved it out in the Southwest. We know from the Spanish testimony it was definitely going on in Mexico and in South America as well. And apparently there are some problems with it in the Middle East. Today there are people in Asia and Africa and Papua New Guinea that still eat people. So it's still a bit of a problem, but not as bad. But these giants who were the offspring of these gods, goddesses, watchers, fallen angels, whatever you want to call them, were very nasty, except the ones that behaved themselves and did what Zeus told them to do. So, do we have a major, major deception going on here on this planet? And that's why there are thousands of years in between the spawning of a Pharaonic line in the kings of ancient Iraq and these kings and queens that went all through Europe and into the Middle East still. What is going on? And the fact that they were attested to, these beings, as ugly and having to change their appearance. And all this war in heaven talk and talk about the abyss, which is under the ocean, which is where a lot of these Nagas, I've talked about that, they come from under the ocean and under the ground. Tartarus would be under the ground, and these supposed gods and goddesses on our side are up in the heavens. And they're fighting or in constant conflict with those beings in the abyss and under the ground. What are we to them? Well, this could be just imagination run wild, and somebody made a mistake with claiming they, were spawned by gods and goddesses, 10,000-year difference, or we got something very, very deceptive going on here. Beings that are immortal, and they claim they're immortal, that are in some kind of a serpentine appearance and frightening, able to cloak their appearance and make themselves look human in order to mate and to manage the human race. And that is the point. I believe we are a managed species. We are not allowed to advance too far, and we are not allowed to degrade too far. And it seems to me maybe when populations get too high, all of a sudden certain diseases come out, like the bubonic plague. There were people claimed that they saw hooded beings spraying dust into the fields in Europe, and then the next thing they knew, the bubonic plague outbreaks would occur. And then you have smallpox that went over to the Americas, wiped out the majority of the people here. It wasn't through warfare. And now you have AIDS and Ebola in Africa. Are we a managed species by a group of, whatever you want to call them, beings that are ugly to us, frightening to us, and they have to hide themselves from us and use intermediaries such as your kings and pharaohs and elites and politicians to manage us while we mine the planet for them and provide entertainment? But we're a managed species. And it's starting to look that way, unfortunately. By now, I think a lot of things should have occurred and our advancement should have exploded, but it hasn't. It's been completely crippled. and we're forced into war after war with the same symbols and the same nonsense over and over. And we're a managed species. We don't get to say where we want to go. So what are we being managed by? Are these things, these beings, something that came from the dinosaur era, and they evolved, and then the planet changed, and they had to devise a way to survive, and they created us as their slave and entertainment and food in some cases, and they keep the technology to themselves? Or did they come from elsewhere? Or did they come from here and they're going elsewhere and they just keep things quiet? And unfortunately, things are starting to look that way if these timelines are correct. They're impossible. They're impossible to be realistic for an average human. Zeus was shown to age and have gray hair by the time he got to the Nordic countries. But he existed over, in my opinion, over 15,000 years ago. And yet here he is with his son spawning a new bloodline 2,000 years ago, a little bit over 2,000 years ago, as well as his daughter Aphrodite spawning a bloodline around the Trojan War period, about 3,200 years ago. It's impossible. It's impossible. And yet these gods claim to be immortal. And they keep showing up with different names at different times, spawning the hybrids, the kings and queens and royals to manage us, never letting us get too far, but never letting us go downhill too far. So I have run this to the end. I've run this to the end. I never thought I was going to go this far. When I wrote my children's books, I thought it was just something fun, something interesting, mythology, and innocent. I had no idea I'd go down the rabbit hole this far. And then to start looking at these timelines and these claims of ancestors just makes it impossible. And then to combine it with the esoteric texts, which I've already proven are talking about the same beings, just shows me something is very, very off on this planet, and there is a major deception. Now I'm going to conclude this video with something in the Nag Hammadi, and that is that when these archons created humans, they were shocked to find out that they had a soul, the immortal man they called it, and a spirit, which they considered feminine, the feminine aspect of the invisible being that inhabited the clay body that they created. So they didn't know what to think of it, and it kind of shocked them to understand that humans have a soul. So these beings are immortal. They apparently don't die, or they are able to transfer their consciousness to another one of their reptilian serpent-type bodies, or whatever it is, amphibious, whatever it is. It's not human. But we do. But yet we have a soul, and they couldn't understand that, and they were shocked by it. And as I said, they're described as androgynous. So when you see these movie stars putting on the androgynous look, they're trying to emulate these archons, these creators. Yet, they have a male gender and a female gender, just as the archons did, but they don't present as fully male or fully female. It's hard to tell. So we have something very disturbing that's been going on for thousands of years, and on top of it, they were not only creating humans, but they were messing around with the animals and making miscegenated creatures. And that may be where your Bigfoot comes from. And I'm learning about this dog man and other, mermaids and other kinds of strange creatures that may not be simply symbolic, but some sort of creation that they were, the watchers that did it were punished for, and it had to be destroyed through a major flood, as well as these oppressive hybrid giants that were killing and eating people. We have some sort of major deception, and these gods and goddesses, they're either in the abyss under the ocean, they're under the ground in Tartarus and underground bases, they're on mountains, they're in caves, or they're in the heavens. So where are we going to go? Are we just a pet? Are we going to be managed forever for their enjoyment and their hard labor? We don't know. And as I said, I never thought I'd go down this rabbit hole this far. I'd like to see some proof or some hard evidence from what I'm seeing in these texts. And I don't know if I ever will, but I've shown you what's in these texts, these books. I've connected it all together. I've proven it to you. It's up to you to decide. I've given you everything, my theories. I've shown you that the timeline is just impossible if it's an average human. Something is just so off. And that is it for my talk. At this point, I will probably present not too much more video-wise unless I go out somewhere and find something interesting. But you've been given enough information to get an idea of what is going on here behind the scenes. Thank you.